On July 9, 1997, Bailey Troy Gardner was born in Lenexa, Kansas, just outside Kansas City. At 27, he was living in Hendersonville, Tennessee, working as a technical program manager at Amazon. Friends and family said he had a heart of gold. He loved being on the water with his boat and was especially close to his dad, Troy. Late Friday night into early Saturday, June 29, 2024, at Cedar Creek Marina, on Old Hickory Lake in Mount Juliet, just outside Nashville, a horrible tragedy unfolded. Just after midnight, the marina's restaurant, the Scoreboard, had closed for the night. Around that same time, 3 masked suspects ambushed employees inside, pistol-whipped 2 of them, and forced them to open the safe. As they fled, Bailey pulled into the parking lot with his boat in tow. One suspect approached the driver's side of his truck and opened fire, shooting Bailey multiple times while he was still in the vehicle. The employees who were assaulted survived, but Bailey was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators worked quickly using Mount Juliet cameras. The tag came back to 41-year-old Adrian A. McLean of Nashville. 3 weeks after the shooting, on July 17, 2024, McLean was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and 3 counts of aggravated robbery. Authorities also noted he had overstayed his visa. 2 accomplices remain at large. 14 months later, in mid-September 2025, a Wilson County jury convicted McLean of first-degree murder and aggravated robbery. Under Tennessee law, the conviction carries a mandatory life sentence. Formal sentencing is currently set for January 9, 2026. Investigators are still seeking the other suspects and are offering a $15,000 reward for information leading to their arrest. Caitlin Jordan Crocker was born May 18, 1999 in Columbia, South Carolina to Harold and Jonna Crocker. At 19, she was living in Winesboro, fun, a little stubborn in the best way, and dreaming big. She graduated Fairfield Central with honors in 2017, earned her cosmetology license, and landed a beauty expert job at the Ulta in Sand Hills. She wanted to do makeup for celebrities one day, but would sadly never get the chance. As for her love life, she was in an on-again, off-again relationship with Alexander Harmon and sometimes stayed at his place in Camden. That's where she was the night of June 2, 2018. Deputies were sent to Harmon's home on Cleveland School Road after his father, calling from New York, told 911 that his son said he'd shot Caitlin and planned to take his own life. When officers arrived, they found Caitlin inside, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. They recovered a 12-gauge shotgun and a spent shell. On body cam, Harmon admitted the shooting and was arrested. Investigators have not publicly offered a specific motive. No robbery, no intruder, just a deadly act inside a troubled relationship. Harmon was booked in 2018 and initially released on a $150,000 surety bond. He missed a court date on November 17, 2023, and a warrant was issued. After more than a year on the run, U.S. Marshals arrested him in Iowa in January 2025, and he was extradited to Kershaw County. On September 19, 2025, the jury found Alexander Harmon guilty of Caitlin's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Natesha Lou Lattimore was born on November 8, 1991. At 29, she lived in Walnut Hills, Cincinnati, Ohio with her 3-year-old son, Nilo. If she went somewhere, he went too. She worked as a nursing assistant and spent the rest of her time with Nilo. On December 5, 2020, her ex-boyfriend, 25-year-old Deshaun Brown, was in Natesha's apartment when the unimaginable happened. What set him off may never be known, but what followed is. Brown attacked Natesha, inflicting fatal injuries. He didn't move her right away. He kept her body in the apartment for days, searched how to clean up the scene, and attempted to scrub away all the evidence. Before sunrise the next morning, December 6th, Brown put Nilo in his stroller and walked to the Purple People Bridge, the pedestrian span between Cincinnati and Newport, Kentucky. He then did the unthinkable, and Nilo died in the freezing Ohio River. Massive searches followed, but his body was never recovered. 5 days later, on December 11th, Brown bought a body bag online, called an Uber, and returned to the same bridge with Natisha's remains. He tried to throw the bag over the side, but it snagged on a ledge. The next day, a security guard spotted the bag, realized what it was, and called 911. That's how police found Natisha. Brown lied to the Uber driver about what was in the bag, and he used Natisha's phone to post as her after she was dead. Attempts to buy time. Investigators used bridge surveillance and digital breadcrumbs, Uber trip records among them, and quickly identified Brown. Near the river, they also recovered a stroller and a Paw Patrol blanket bearing Nilo's blood. After Brown's arrest, the court process stretched on. In June 2022, during a hearing, Nilo's father, Tonio Hughes, rushed the table and struck Brown, grief in public view. Nearly 5 years later, on September 10, 2025, Brown pleaded guilty to 2 counts of aggravated murder. In exchange, prosecutors took death off the table, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for motive, a witness told authorities, Brown blamed Nate Shah for a miscarriage and had talked about killing her and Nalo in retaliation. In 2021, tragedy struck the family again when 7-year-old Charisse Lattimore, a cousin of Nalo, was killed after being struck by a car in Avondale. The family will carry these losses forever, but Brown will spend the rest of his life in prison. Cheryl Ferguson was born on July 27, 1958, in Long Beach, California. Friends and family describe a big-hearted woman who was fiercely devoted to her son, Philip. At 65, she lived in Anaheim Hills with her husband, former Orange County Judge, Jeffrey Ferguson. Things in the marriage were rocky, to say the least, and Jeffrey had a known drinking problem. Money was always a flashpoint for their arguments, and alcohol only fueled the situation. On August 3, 2023, Jeffrey sat on the bench in court as usual, drinking during the lunch hour and continuing upon arriving home. He and Cheryl ended up at a restaurant that evening where an argument broke out, and as was typical for Jeffrey, in moments of frustration, he made a gun-like gesture toward her, gestures that Cheryl had relayed to her family. Upon arriving home, the argument continued. Not long after, 911 received a call from Jeffrey saying he'd accidentally shot his wife. Officers arrived to find Cheryl with a single fatal wound. When questioned by police, he stuck to his story that the shooting was an accident. The only problem was he sent a text to court staff that read, "I just lost it. I just shot my wife. I won't be in tomorrow. I will be in custody. I'm so sorry." That text would be the focal point of a case built on his own words, not just for what happened, but why. So what did Jeffrey say really happened? According to him, he was removing his gun from his ankle holster to set it on a cluttered coffee table when he fumbled it because of a shoulder injury and it accidentally discharged. However, investigators weren't buying it. They believed that Jeffrey had shot Cheryl in an angry and intoxicated state. Prosecutors agreed, and he was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. A subsequent search of the home turned up 47 firearms, including the Glock, and more than 26,000 rounds of ammo. During the first trial in March of 2025, one juror felt the evidence wasn't quite enough, leading to an 11-1 deadlock jury. Prosecutors wasted no time in retrying him the very next month. During the second trial, they emphasized his alcohol use, the gun gesture at the restaurant, his firearms training, plus the fact that Glocks are equipped with a safe action system. The system includes a trigger safety lever on the trigger itself, a firing pin safety to block the striker from moving, and a drop safety that ensures the firing pin can only move when the trigger is intentionally pulled. This ensures the pistol only fires when the trigger is deliberately and fully pressed. There was also the very incriminating text message he had sent to his court staff, which led with, "Just lost it." That doesn't sound like an accidental shooting. And the second jury agreed and found him guilty of second-degree murder. To avoid conflicts in Orange County, sentencing was moved to the Los Angeles Superior Court. As the terms of his sentence were read, Jeffrey broke down. Cheryl's brother, Larry Rosen, and Jeffrey's son, Kevin, asked the court for leniency. Both said they believed the shooting was accidental. Larry specifically said that he originally thought Jeffrey had murdered his sister, but felt the evidence during the first trial showed it was a tragic accident. Another brother, Jeff Rosen, said he now regretted ever repeating Cheryl's frustration about Jeffrey's gun gesture during arguments. Philip described parents who argued and loved, and he stood firm that his mother's death was accidental. The judge weighed those pleas but called the case against Jeffrey absolutely overwhelming, citing his post-shooting text to court staff and hours of recorded statements in custody. Those statements included him saying that everyone would hate him, and he even pleaded for a jury to, and I quote, "convict my ass." After being convicted, Jeffrey told the court he loved his wife and understood the verdict, but insisted it was a horrific accident. He asked to remain in Orange County Jail during the appeal, prompting the judge to rebuke him again for believing rules didn't apply. However, when all was said and done, 23 jurors across both trials voted guilty. Only one favored involuntary manslaughter. Cheryl's life ended in the home she shared with her husband. Those who loved her speak of generosity and devotion, especially to Philip. That part of her story doesn't waver even as everything else has. Tim Smith was the kind of fella folks counted on. Masters in social work, ran an assisted living community in Ocala, always showed up for his people. 8 years married to Herbert Swilly, who went by Herb, living in the Citrus Park neighborhood with Herb's daughter, Jordan. Weekends, you might catch Tim and Herb easing down the road on a three-wheeler, wind in their faces and not a care in the world. But come Saturday, March 25, 2023, about 10:45, deputies rolled out for a welfare check. Tim had missed work, which just wasn't like him. They used a landlord's key, stepped inside a little apartment tied to Tim, and the room told a story no one wanted to hear. Injuries to his face and neck, a tight mark at the throat, and that sharp, bleachy smell hanging in the air. Trouble had come calling. Thursday, the 23rd, Tim left work around 4. After that, it's all timestamps and tail lights. Prosecutors said the violence didn't begin in that apartment at all. It started back at the house Tim shared with Herb. Said Tim had an extreme dose of diphenhydramine, Benadryl's sleepy cousin, more than 30 times the usual dentaligature around his neck. Later, they said his body was moved to that small meetup apartment and staged like a fling gone wrong. Now the defense tried to plant doubt. That apartment saw traffic, dating apps, visitors, mixed DNA. Maybe detectives got tunnel vision, but there was a thread to pull. In the deep hours of March 24th, a white pickup, Herb's, caught on camera headed toward the apartment, then back home. Tim's Jeep shows up there and stays. A figure walks away into the dark. Next morning, deputies enter, find Tim on the floor. Body cam captures the moment they tell Herb his husband is dead. He doesn't ask how, just starts in on where he'd been. Earlier that same day, Herb had called the sheriff, couldn't reach Tim, said 2 nights before they watched TV, went to bed. He left early for the gym, came home to an empty house, figured Tim went on to work. Investigators later said parts of that tale were false or self-serving. And when they pressed, Herb's lawyer wanted immunity before he'd say another word. Then came more. The couple's Ring camera system accessed the key footage, deleted according to the state. Jordan testified she heard noises that night and helped throw things away at her father's direction. Something she regrets, and that he told her to say he'd been home all night. Neighbors near the house remembered late night shouting around March 23rd, 24th, and cars coming and going. Traffic that stopped cold after the homicide. Friends from AA and Tim's work circle said Herb was bullying about money and about Tim looking at a job out of country with a Zoom interview set for 9 a.m. on the 24th. He never made it. A recruiter said Tim was enthusiastic. Brookdale co-workers described the scramble when he didn't show. The landlord said Tim alone held that lease. On the 25th, Herb asked for entry, said he lost his key. A shop owner and a close friend recalled Herb moving quick, donating Tim's things, cleaning the Jeep so police wouldn't have ammunition, talking insurance and paperwork sooner than felt right. A DNA analyst with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement explained most items showed Tim's DNA. A few mixed profiles fit with the apartment's known use. The defense leaned on that. The state answered with the digital map, Tim's phone and Herb's truck, leaving home together just before 2 a.m. No credible sign Tim arranged any late-night meet with someone else. And then the why, part heartbreak, part arithmetic. Tim was the primary earner, eyeing that new job and maybe a new start. If he left, the money went with him. If he died, prosecutors said, Herb stood to benefit retirement funds and a life insurance policy around $333,000. After a week of testimony, jurors had the full picture. The drug levels, the ligature, the bleach, the truck and the Jeep, deleted video, tossed drugs, the finances, the plan to move. On Friday, September 19, 2025, they returned a verdict. Herbert Swilly, guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. Judge Robert Hodges handed down life with 687 days time served, and somewhere in Alcala, the elders Tim championed were tended by someone else that weekend. Franz stepped out of a courthouse into the Florida sun, searching for words that fit a man who didn't miss work, didn't miss promises, and this time couldn't come. Not the ending he earned, but at least finally an answer. Crystal Faye Todd was born on January 4, 1974 in Conway, South Carolina to parents Junior and Bonnie Todd. At the age of 17, she was a senior at a Conway, South Carolina high school, and as an early graduation gift, her mother Bonnie Faye Todd had given her a brand new 1991 Toyota Celica. On November 17, 1991, Crystal stopped in for her grandmother's birthday celebration and left about 7 p.m. kissing her mother goodbye and saying she was headed to the mall to meet her friends. Around 9 p.m. Crystal and a friend decided to go to a party in the Punch Bowl community where they stayed until 11 p.m. After dropping her friend off at home, Crystal rushed back to the mall to say goodbye to friends before her midnight curfew. But she never arrived home that night, and when midnight came and went, her mother became very concerned. At 3 a.m., Bonnie phoned police and a dispatcher took her description along with the description of her car. He tried to reassure her it wasn't unusual for teens to show up late and that Bonnie should just let him know when her daughter got home. At 8 a.m., Bonnie was panicking and called 911. Next, she contacted her daughter's longtime close friend, Ken Register, who said that he hadn't seen Crystal all night and that he would check the local hospitals. Two of Crystal's friends had found her car parked at the Conway Middle School. An officer was dispatched to the location and found the car locked with Crystal's purse still inside. The officer tried to reassure her that Crystal was likely still out with friends and having too much fun to call or come home. But Bonnie knew that wasn't like Crystal, and she said she knew her daughter wasn't coming home. The next day, on November 18, 1991, two men were driving just outside of Conway in the Maple community when one of them noticed something odd lying in the ditch along the road. Getting out for a closer inspection, the men realized it was a female body. The scene was gruesome and she was found to have been sexually assaulted. Her mother, a widow, was inconsolable. She told police that she was certain that Crystal's killer was someone she knew. Investigators believed the same thing, especially when they learned that she would have never gotten into a vehicle with someone she didn't know. Criminal profilers predicted that the killer would be an angry young white male who was confident the law wouldn't catch him, and he was probably a friend of the victim. Police asked 51 of Crystal's male friends and acquaintances if they would give DNA samples, and they all agreed. Crystal's friends, including longtime friend Ken Register, were there for Bonnie through the entire ordeal. Ken and Crystal had grown up together and remained close friends, and even Bonnie had always been fond of him. He was a shoulder for Bonnie to cry on and someone to rant to. However, before she was murdered, the friendship between Crystal and Ken had taken a turn for the worse. Crystal had confided in Bonnie that Ken had propositioned her for sex, despite the fact that he had a girlfriend and she had been appalled by this. The two had dated briefly in their early teens, but then decided to return to being close friends again. There had also been serious warning signs about Ken in the previous years. When he was 15, he made an obscene phone call to a grown woman and described in sickening detail how he wanted to mutilate and kill her. When it was his turn to be interviewed by police, he hesitantly but willingly provided his DNA, but the lab was backlogged, and it would be a couple months before they got to all the DNA samples collected from the citizens. Then, on February 15, 1992, the lab notified the police that they had a DNA match. Ken Register eventually broke down and confessed to the crime. He told investigators a story that is very likely untrue. He told them on the night Crystal died, they had unprotected consensual sex. Ken said when he didn't use protection, Crystal became furious and threatened to cry rape if she became pregnant. Said he became outraged at Crystal's screaming and insults. And before he realized what he was doing, he was stabbing her. Ken told investigators when he came to his senses and realized what he'd done. He panicked. He pulled Crystal from his car, tossed her into the ditch, threw away the knife and hurried home. Crystal's car keys and other evidence was found located at the Register home. Bonnie was shocked that she had been duped by Ken, who even served as a pallbearer at her daughter's funeral. After Register's arrest, it was discovered he had been arrested in September 1991 for exposing himself to a couple of teenage girls after asking them for directions. The charges were still pending when he was arrested for Crystal's murder. In September 1992, Register was tried on the indecent exposure charges and quickly found guilty. Then in early 1993, jurors found him guilty for Crystal's death, his sexual misconduct, kidnapping, and torture. Ken Register was sentenced to life in prison and remains incarcerated at the Broad River Prison in Columbia, South Carolina. There are reportedly many friends and family members of Crystal's who continue to write to and attend parole hearings anytime he is eligible. Despite being sentenced to 2 life sentences, he was eligible for parole in February 2022, but he waived his right to face the parole board. Nearly 2,700 people signed a petition asking that his parole not be granted. He will be eligible to face the parole board again in 2024. Her mother Bonnie passed away in 2014 and is buried next to her daughter in Conway. Yanira Cedias was born on March 3, 1992, and by the age of 30, she was a mother of 3 young children and described as vibrant and lively with a big smile. On March 4, 2022, Yanira was celebrating her 30th birthday at a local casino. After the celebration, her ex-boyfriend, Juan Gastelum, picked her up and took her back to his apartment. This was the last time she was ever seen alive. After going missing, Moses Lake police called Yanira's phone to see if someone would answer. A man believed to be her ex, Gastelum, answered the phone. This information led police to question Gastelum. Allegedly, after they arrived at his apartment, Gastelum murdered Yanira and then took photos of himself sexually assaulting her. He then left the apartment with her body. Her family, with help of volunteers and community members, started searching several locations for Yanira's remains. Over 2 months later, on May 12th, detectives received data from Gastelum's cell phone leading them to where he went after leaving the apartment that night, which was a remote area off Highway 12 just outside Wauhula Junction, Washington. When authorities arrived at the location, they found her body in a sleeping bag covered with tree limbs and leaves. At this time, the medical examiner has not released the details on how Yanira died. However, Moses Lake police say that they found a large hunting knife that Gastelum threw away at a gas station and cadaver dogs detected human blood on it. He was arrested days later in Oregon, but fought extradition for 2 months before finally being extradited back to Washington state. He was charged with second-degree murder and second-degree rape following disturbing photos found on his cell phone. Documents also say Gastelum admitted to being physically abusive to Yanira, as 2 physical domestic calls were referenced from October 2021 and January 2022. On October 4, 2021, Yanira even requested a police report to get a restraining order against Gastelum. Gastelum had pleaded not guilty to both charges, and his next court appearance is scheduled for July 5, 2022. Yanira's 3 young children now live with their grandmother, Yanira's mother, Anna, and they deeply miss their mommy. On January 4, 1996, a woman called 911 and reported that a black man had broken into her apartment located at 2205 North Broadway Street in Santa Ana, California, and was stabbing her boyfriend. When police arrived, they found 22-year-old Christopher Hervey with multiple stab wounds. Tragically, Christopher would later die from his injuries. His girlfriend, Jade Binning, who he shared the apartment with, would tell police that she woke up at 3 a.m. to find Christopher struggling with the intruder. She said she tried to help but was slashed in the hand. Investigators would also speak with the neighbors who told police they'd heard a loud argument inside the apartment before police arrived. Detectives for this case told reporters at the time that it seemed like it was an attempted burglary gone wrong, and nobody was arrested. The case went cold until January 2020, when investigators received an anonymous letter implicating Jade Benning for the murder of Christopher Hervey. After reopening the case, investigators found forensic evidence linking her to the crime. So on May 3, 2022, 26 years after his death, Benning, now a mother of 3, was arrested by the Marshals Lone Star Fugitive Task Force near her home in Austin, Texas, and charged with his murder. In 1986, Michelle Welch was 12 years old and lived in Tacoma, Washington. On March 26, 1986, a babysitter allowed Michelle and her 2 younger sisters to ride their bikes to the nearby Puget Park in Tacoma. When they arrived, they realized they left their lunches, so Michelle rode her bike back home and then returned with their lunches. When she returned, she chained her bike next to one of her sister's bikes, set the lunches on the table, and went looking for her siblings, who had gone to a nearby business to use the restroom because there wasn't any at the park. When Michelle's sisters returned to the park, they didn't see her, so they went and played near a cave under the bridge for another half an hour. When the sisters returned to the park, they found a brown paper bag with their lunches on the table, but still no Michelle. They called her name and started down a trail looking for her, before their babysitter summoned them back. It was then determined that Michelle was missing. A classmate later told detectives that he saw a man in the park that day under the Proctor Bridge who kept watching the girls. Police were called to the park and began searching with a tracking dog. That night before midnight, the dog found her body in a makeshift fire pit area in the gulch. She had been beaten and sexually assaulted and died from a cut to the neck. DNA was collected and preserved, but unfortunately, there were no matches in the Cody's database. Parents of children in Tacoma would no longer allow their kids to ride their bikes or venture out as they had always done. Her murder would go unsolved for the next 30 years. In 2018, Parabon Nanolabs uploaded the suspect's DNA to GEDmatch, a public genetic genealogy database which permits searches of this type. Genetic genealogists then began building an in-depth family tree, narrowing the suspect to one of 2 brothers, Gary Charles Hartman. Both brothers had lived in Tacoma, Washington, when Michelle was murdered. The pair was placed under police surveillance, and officers eventually followed Gary Hartman into a restaurant, where they obtained a napkin he had used and discarded. Lo and behold, the DNA matched the DNA from the crime scene. 70-year-old Gary Hartman was charged with her rape and murder and sentenced to more than 26 years in prison. At his sentencing, he told his own family that he was sorry. According to reports, Hartman was working as a community nurse specialist at Western State Hospital and had a clean criminal record. However, Michelle wasn't the only young girl murdered in Tacoma in 1986. Within months of her murder, 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian was also murdered. It was always believed that their killers were likely the same person as their slayings were very similar and both had been innocently riding their bikes through the city parks. But in 2016, Paramount Nanolabs created a snapshot phenotype report to the task force, which showed that although both men were Caucasian, the suspect in Michelle's case had 9% Northern Native American admixture and Jennifer's killer did not, meaning they were not the same person. Jennifer's killer, 66-year-old Robert Washburn, was also caught using information provided to investigators by genetic genealogists. Just like Hartman, Washburn was caught after a paper napkin was collected that he had been using at a restaurant, allowing them to collect his DNA. The DNA from the napkin matched the DNA that was collected from the crime scene in 1986. These 2 innocent girls' murders prompted a new bill called Jennifer and Michelle's Law. Signed into law in 2019 by Governor Jay Inslee, the bill sought to expand law enforcement's DNA database and allows detectives to obtain DNA samples from deceased sex offenders. The morning of December 7, 1985 in Frenchville, Maine, Armand and Lorraine Pelletier Siberian Husky was led outside to relieve himself in the freezing temperatures and returned ever so gently holding a deceased newborn baby. Shocked, the couple took the baby in and called police. It was discovered that a woman gave birth just 700 feet from the home. She then left the infant in the snow and below 0 temperatures. Upon leaving, she left tie prints in the snow. Police told them the newborn baby may have lived up to 30 minutes in the 30 below temperatures. The couple was never able to have children of their own and said had the baby survived, they would have loved to adopt her. Nearly 37 years later, on June 13th, in Maine State Police detectives traveled to Lowell, Massachusetts to arrest the mother of baby Jane Doe. Using genetic genealogy, DNA, and many years of hard work, the suspect was finally identified. The mother was identified as 58-year-old Leanne Daigle, formerly Leanne Garrett of Lowell, Massachusetts. She was quickly charged with the infant's murder, but has pleaded not guilty. At the age of 21, Daigle reportedly drove to a gravel pit in Frenchfield and gave birth to a baby girl. She alleges that she had no clue that she was pregnant, and on the night of December 6, 1985, she was driving home from work when she had the sudden urge to urinate. She pulled to the side of the road and gave birth and believed the infant was stillborn and left, blocking out what had just occurred. A couple weeks later, she and her new boyfriend moved in together in New Hampshire, where he was offered a new job. They had met at a July 4th celebration 5 months before she gave birth. They later married in 1987 and had 2 daughters and was reportedly a good mom to her daughters. The same technique used to find Leanne was used to find the biological father of the baby. He is now in an assisted living facility in Florida and unable to speak or communicate. One of Leanne's daughters had an in-depth conversation with her mother after she was arrested. Daigle said she had blocked out the memory and didn't recall anything about it until the police showed up to her door telling her she was the mother of an infant found dead decades earlier. It was determined she likely became pregnant on her 21st birthday but does not remember what happened the night of her birthday and did not recognize the name of the baby's father. She stated she suspects that she was drugged and raped. Her new boyfriend, who would later become her husband, stated if he had known she was pregnant at the time they started dating, that he would have wanted her to keep the baby and have them raise it together. He said that if she knew about the pregnancy, she may have hid it out of fear that he would leave her. At first, detectives did not believe that Daigle could have given birth without help and suspected John Daigle, her then boyfriend of several months, had assisted her. John said he produced a college transcript showing that he was in Orano in early December finishing school, and a roommate from the time sent police an email backing up his alibi. This will definitely be a case to continue to watch. Jody Loomis was born June 5, 1952, and at the age of 20, she was living in Bethel, Washington at 20 Winesap Road. On August 23, 1972, she was innocently riding her bicycle from her home to a stable on Strumey Road to visit and ride her horse, Sadi, which was several miles away. She was last seen alive riding north on North Road to 164th Street Southeast by a girl working at a fruit stand. That girl saw her crossing the Bethel Everett Highway and riding up the hill on what was then called Penny Creek Road at about 5 p.m. About 30 minutes later, a couple who was driving up a secluded dirt road to Penny Creek Road, which is now Mill Creek Road, found Jody's partially nude body. She was still alive, but had been tragically shot twice and sexually assaulted. They placed her into their sob sonnet and was sadly pronounced dead on arrival to the hospital. It was determined that she had likely been shot with a .22 caliber weapon. Also, the bridle of her horse was missing from the crime scene and her bicycle had been thrown down a steep embankment. Her murder would go unsolved for the next 46 years. In 2008, a state crime lab technician discovered a tiny semen stain on Jody's boot that had previously gone unnoticed. This DNA would be used years later to begin a new investigation using genetic genealogy performed by Parbon Nanolabs and genetic genealogist Deb Stone. After the genealogist identified the parents of a possible suspect based on the family tree, police began to follow him. They would acquire a DNA sample from a discarded coffee cup he tossed in the trash while at the Tula Lip Resort Casino. Washington State Patrol's crime lab confirmed that it positively matched the DNA profile from the crime scene and indeed belonged to 77-year-old Terrence Miller of Edmonds, Washington. In April 2019, Miller was arrested at his home by detectives with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and charged with her murder. Miller had a history of sex crimes dating back to the 1960s, including molesting young girls and indecent exposure. After he was let out on bond, he was found dead, presumably from suicide, while the jurors were deliberating. 3 hours after his death, a jury convicted him of first-degree murder. Jody's brother, John Loomis, said he would have at least liked to see Miller go to prison after getting away with it for 48 long years. At the age of 30, Sherry Renee Herrera was a mother of 4 children living in Tulare, California. On March 30th, 1993, Sherry had been dropped off at a rest area between Tulare and Pixley, California, and had arranged to be picked up in 10 minutes. This would be the last time she was seen alive. Just a few days later, her body was found in the desert along the I-10 freeway in Riverside County, California. DNA was collected from her body in the crime scene, and she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Court records identify her as a non-prostitute and drug user who worked the highway rest area in Tulare, California. With no leads, her case would go cold for the next 3 decades. In late May of 2022, Texas Rangers arrested 67-year-old Douglas Thomas at his home in Waco, Texas, for the murder of Shinda Denise Hayes. Shinda had been found murdered in Titus County, Texas in April of 1992, and just like Sherry, Shinda was also a known prostitute. Thomas was connected by authorities to that murder by a DNA match to evidence obtained from the crime scene. Thomas had traveled extensively throughout the United States during his 40-plus years as a truck driver. Using genetic genealogy, a family tree was created which led them to recently retired Thomas likely being responsible for Sherry's death as well. Investigators traveled to Texas and interviewed Thomas about Sherry's homicide. His DNA was collected to verify that he was indeed the suspect they were looking for. Based on their investigation, he was charged with her rape and murder. Thomas remains in custody in Texas and will be prosecuted first for the 1992 murder of Shinda. The DA's office will then request extradition to California to face justice for the murder of Sherry. It is believed that Thomas is a serial killer with more victims during his decades working as a long-haul truck driver. Kim Everett Kirk was born January 12, 1970, and was one of 3 daughters. She met David Neal Cox through a friend at work around the year 2000, and initially he was a nice guy. They quickly married, and he became a stepfather to Kim's 2 daughters, and the couple went on to have 2 sons together. Cox was a truck driver, but following a back injury and a prescription for painkillers, he left the workforce and qualified for disability. He then became addicted to meth and started abusing Kim. Due to the drugs, his behavior and personality had suddenly changed. At some point, Cox had even gone as far as manufacturing his own meth. In 2009, when her daughter Lindsay confessed to her mother that Cox had been sexually assaulting her for a few years, Kim finally decided to divorce him. But this instilled fear into Kim, and she made plans for her and the kids to take refuge at a women's shelter out of fear that Cox would retaliate. Kim took the children and left and pressed charges against Cox, and when deputies arrived to the home, Cox was arrested for statutory rape, sexual battery, and child abuse. They also found the precursors to make meth. Kim, still deathly afraid of her estranged husband, moved her and the children in with her sister, Christy Simon. While in the county jail, he told other prisoners that if he ever got out, he would kill his wife. However, unable to raise bond money, he remained in jail for 9 months. During that time, he often made threatening phone calls and would tell her he was coming for her. Suddenly, in April 2010, his bond was significantly reduced, allowing him to raise enough funds to get out. The family only learned he had been released when a friend saw him on the street and called Kim. She then went to the Chancery Court and got protective orders against him in Lee, Pontotoc, and Union counties. Now that he was out, he would sometimes drive by her home and point his finger at her and simulate a gun. Then about 7 p.m. on May 14, 2010, tragedy would strike. 12-year-old Lindsay was sitting on the couch while her mom's sister, Christy, was cooking dinner, and one of her brothers was playing basketball outside. Her mother, Kim, was in the back of the house preparing a bath for her youngest son. That's when Cox shot through the screen door of the home in Sherman, Mississippi, before barging inside and ordering Lindsay not to move. He then chased her aunt out of the house. He then found Kim and shot her twice. Her youngest son would frantically run to a closet. Meanwhile, Aunt Christy called Kim's parents and told them what was happening. Cox called her parents and told them it was all their fault he was arrested and he had planned to kill all of them. Kim's father and stepmother, Benny and Melody Kirk, then had to serve as negotiators on the phone with Cox. They could hear Cox taunting Kim as she was dying and belittling her and said he wanted to sit there and watch her suffer. Kim was able to talk on the phone briefly to her father while she lay on the floor bleeding to death and said, "Daddy, I'm dying." She was still hanging on to life at midnight. He had barricaded the four of them inside the home and physically and mentally tortured the family and told law enforcement he planned to kill the children and then himself. When he stopped talking to law enforcement at 3:23 a.m., officers stormed the house and arrested him. Kim was sadly already deceased during those nearly 9 hours of holding the children hostage. Cox sexually assaulted his stepdaughter, Lindsay, 3 times in front of her dying mother, even as police surrounded the home. 2 years later, he pleaded guilty to capital murder, kidnapping, and several other felonies related to the standoff and was sentenced to death. He then began years of appealing his conviction and sentence. He then made plans to waive his appeals and proceed with the execution, which infuriated Lindsay as she wanted him to sit in prison and reflect on what he did to her and her family. Lindsay has allowed her name to be made public to tell her story. On November 17, 2021, 50-year-old Cox died by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, and Lindsay, now 23, was there to witness it. He became the first Mississippi inmate to be put to death in 9 years. In the days prior to his scheduled execution, Cox made a shocking confession. He said that he had been the one that killed his sister-in-law, Felicia Cox, who was married to his brother. On November 19th, 2 days after his execution, his attorneys hand-delivered a letter in which Cox confessed to the murder and gave details of where her body is located. Felicia had been missing since July 2, 2007, after making a visit to Kim and David Cox's home. Her remains were found where he said they'd be in Pontotoc County on his family's former property. He had been a person of interest in Felicia's disappearance, but authorities had no evidence at the time. Kim's father and stepmother raised Lindsay and her 2 younger brothers after Kim's death, and one of his sons still has fear that he will come after them, even knowing that he is no longer breathing the air that he didn't deserve. Anna Maria Wilson was born on May 18, 1996 in Littleton, New Hampshire, to Eric and Karen Wilson. She grew up in Kirby, Vermont, and went by Mo and was a gifted multi-sport athlete. She was the captain of her high school soccer team and was a nationally ranked junior skier, placing 3rd in the 2013 U.S. Junior National Championship downhill event. After college, she transitioned from skiing to biking, and at the age of 25, she was a professional bike racer and worked as a demand planner for Specialized. She enjoyed cooking, riding, and traveling, especially to Italy. She recently excelled at gravel racing, a relatively new category of cycling that some consider a hybrid of road cycling and mountain biking. On May 10, 2022, a profile in Bello News referred to her as the winningest woman in the American off-road scene. The next day, May 11, 2022, was preparing to compete in the 157-mile gravel low-coast bike race in Texas. She was staying with a friend in Austin, Texas, while preparing for the upcoming race in Hico. She told her friend she was going for an afternoon swim, but she didn't go along. Cyclist Colin Strickland joined her and the two would have dinner together afterwards. Colin would then drop Mo back at her friend's house. That's where the story takes a horrible turn. Colin's girlfriend, 35-year-old Caitlin Marie Armstrong, was apparently jealous of Mo and Colin's relationship. Armstrong had even confronted Mo before and told her to stay away from Colin. After Colin dropped Mo off, Armstrong would allegedly shoot Mo to death inside of her friend's home. Armstrong had been suspicious of Colin cheating on her with Mo for several months. However, Colin told police that he and Mo were only briefly romantically involved in the fall of 2021, but only while he and Armstrong were temporarily broken up. He said after that, Mo and him remained friends and their relationship became completely platonic and professional. Her loved one said, had no reason to believe that she was romantically involved with anyone when she was killed. 6 days after the murder, police issued a homicide warrant for Armstrong. Following Mo's killing, Police located 2 handguns in the home Collins shared with Armstrong, which matched the spent shell casing found at the murder scene. Armstrong's car was also seen on surveillance camera near the crime scene prior to the shooting. Somehow, Armstrong was able to obtain a fraudulent passport and would use this to flee the country. She would fly from Texas to New York and then fly from the New York International Airport to Costa Rica. She was on the run for 43 days until she was found and arrested on June 29, 2022 at a hostel on Santa Teresa Beach in Costa Rica. Investigators discovered that before she fled Austin, Texas, she sold her Jeep Grand Cherokee to a CarMax dealership. Also, while Armstrong was on the run, she cut her hair and dyed it dark brown and wore a bandage on her nose, claiming she had a surfboarding accident. Collins states that he has a lot of regret and torture knowing that this horrible crime was so close to him. As of June 30, 2022, she is being detained in Costa Rica on an immigration violation until she is deported back to Texas to face murder charges and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Michelle Koski was born in 1973 and was said to love animals and enjoyed playing Super Mario Bros. At the age of 17, she was still in high school and living in Seattle, Lake Washington in the 13,300 block of 30th Avenue Northeast, with her 28-year-old boyfriend. She had plans to attend college the next fall and was working at Taco Bell. On August 18, 1990, she called her mother Violet Simonson and agreed to come back home and stay at her and her stepfather's house to take care of the dog while her mother and stepfather went on a trip out of town. Before going to her parents' house, she visited an apartment earlier in the day in the 6200 block of 14th Avenue, Northwest Seattle, and then was given a ride back to her apartment. At some point, though, she was given a ride to an area in Snohomish County where teens were known to hang out, drink, and ride motorcycles. While there, things would take a terrible turn and she would end up missing. A week later, on August 25, 1990, a woman walking her dog near Echo Lake Road and Highway 522 stumbled upon a female's lifeless body. The finding was in Snohomish, Washington, not far from where Michelle went missing. It was determined that the body belonged to Michelle and she had tragically been sexually assaulted and murdered. Investigators said that whoever committed the crime used pieces of concrete from a nearby pile to finish her off. Her live-in boyfriend was initially a person of interest but would ultimately be ruled out as a suspect. Around the time Michelle's body was found, the Green River Killer had been terrorizing the Seattle area for about a decade, and Seattle investigators considered a serial killer to be a possibility. But sadly, with no concrete evidence pointing at anyone, the case would go cold for the next 3 decades. In 2005, a cold case team reopened her case, and over the next 10 years, they would comb through several possible suspects, but they were all ruled out by DNA comparison. In 2012, the detective on the case stated that what likely happened was the person probably intended to have sex with her, but she didn't want to, and when she tried to flee, he ran her down and strangled her. In 2021, Parabon Nanolabs would take the DNA sample, but their process would be extended because they had to deconvolute the DNA sample because it contained the DNA from both the suspect and victim, which makes it a tedious and challenging process. Then, genetic genealogist Deb Stone spent about 9 more months building a family tree and entering her findings into public genealogy websites, including Family Tree DNA and GeneMatch. From her home in Oregon, she then found 2 likely suspects, which were 2 brothers, and these names were provided to the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office to finish the investigation to determine which one was the likely killer. State and county crime labs compared the crime scene samples to one of the brothers, revealing they were the same person and the DNA was a match. 32 years after her murder, on June 30, 2022, the sheriff's office announced they had identified the killer as Robert Anthony Brooks. Authorities say Brooks was 23 at the time and had been released from prison 4 months before the murder and was living with a relative only a few blocks from Michelle. Authorities did not say for what he was previously convicted of, but it was reportedly a juvenile conviction. During his life, he was never on detectives' radar in her case, and it's unclear how and when she crossed paths with Brooks. But this waste of space wouldn't face justice for Michelle's senseless murder because he died of natural causes at the age of 48 in King County, Washington in 2016. Michelle's mother told TV news crews she was grateful there would be no trial and said other families waiting for answers should take this case to heart and wait for the technology as it's getting better every day, and pretty soon none of those bad guys will be able to hide. In August 2019, employees of McKnight Tire in Columbia, Missouri found a small backpack hidden inside of a tire along the tree line at the edge of the store's parking lot. Upon checking it, they made a gruesome discovery. In the backpack was the decomposing remains of a full-term female infant, which was mostly bones. Due to the state of decomposition, the initial autopsy was unable to determine the cause of death or how long the child may have been there. The Columbia Police Department investigated many leads over the next few years, but were unable to determine what happened to the infant and who her parents were. In September of 2020, Columbia Police Department partnered with Othram to use advanced DNA testing to develop new leads that might help identify the infant. A DNA Solves crowdfund was established to cover the cost of testing for the case. Othram was able to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the infant. Meanwhile, on June 14, 2022, a letter that had been found years earlier in a wallet hidden behind a drawer at a local Super 8 hotel was released to authorities. When it was first discovered in 2019, the hotel employee didn't know the significance of the disturbing letter. It was then placed in a drawer in Lost and Found, where it remained until news of the discovery of the remains hit the news. It appeared to have been written by the mother of the infant and was intended for the police department. By calling the police and alerting them to the letter, the hotel employee really helped the case despite holding on to it for years. A genetic genealogist built a family tree based on the DNA and was able to give law enforcement a possible identification of the baby and her parents. On June 28, 2022, the Columbia Police Department announced that the baby had been identified as Simone J. Daniels. She was 4 to 5 months old when she died at the nearby hotel, and her remains had been inside the tire since 2017. Her parents were arrested the same day as the press conference released the baby's identity. The letter left at the hotel was the key to solving the mystery. 30-year-old Stefan Fountain of St. Joseph was charged with first-degree murder and abandonment of a corpse, and 28-year-old Lavisha Daniels of St. Louis was charged with abandonment of a corpse and first-degree endangering the welfare of a child. The letter allegedly written by Daniels states that she had completed her shift at People Ready, where she had been working on construction projects. She claims that after coming home, Fountain fed the baby before going to bed, and when Daniels woke up, she discovered her daughter in an odd posture with a towel around her neck and blood in her mouth. She claimed they both attempted CPR before she panicked and ran away while Fountain placed the baby in a backpack and left it at McKnight Tire. According to records, state identity cards were also discovered within the wallet that was left at the hotel. As a last note, Simone wasn't their only child. They actually have several other children together. On December 8, 1993, Valerie Brock found the lifeless body of a baby boy in her backyard in a rural area of Hugo, Oklahoma, and called authorities. The medical examiner would determine that the baby was born alive and then murdered. Now a homicide case, Choctaw County Sheriff's Office brought in OSBI agents to help. Agents conducted numerous interviews in the aftermath of the baby's death, including interviewing 25-year-old Myonia Michelle Allen, who was working for Brock and dating Brock's son. Despite the investigation, no suspects in the homicide were identified. The case went cold, but investigators retained samples of the boy's DNA for future use, and he became known as Baby Boy Hugo. Baby Boy Hugo's case captured the hearts of many in rural Oklahoma, with locals raising money to give him a proper burial. He was buried in January 1994 in Babyland, a section of Mount Olivet Cemetery reserved for infants who'd passed away. Fast forward to October 2020 when an OSBI agent teamed up with the Cold Case Unit and criminologist at the OSBI Forensic Science Center. They submitted DNA evidence to Parbon Nanolabs for testing, and by April 2021, they had results. Upon reviewing the results, the OSBI team pursued their leads right back to Myonia Michelle Allen. On June 15, 2022, an OSBI agent met with Allen at the Durant Police Department, and she agreed to submit DNA samples to determine if she was Baby Doe's biological mother. However, they wouldn't need the DNA results because about 20 minutes into the interview, she admitted the baby was hers and admitted to killing him after he was born and burying him in the backyard. At the time of Baby Doe's death, Alan worked at a daycare center and Valerie Brock was her boss, the woman that discovered the baby in her backyard and mother of Alan's boyfriend at the time. She allegedly said that she did not tell anyone about her pregnancy, the delivery, or the baby's alleged murder. The court document states that on December 7, 1993, Alan said she had spent the night at Brock's home along with her boyfriend, his son, and her daughter. During the early morning hours of December 8th, she had a physical altercation which caused her to go into labor unexpectedly at Brock's home and gave birth in a barn on the property. She said she carried the newborn to the house after his birth and laid him on a couch inside. She retrieved a weapon from the house and carried him behind the well house. Later that morning, Brock noticed what she thought was a doll in her backyard, but when she walked outside to retrieve the toy, she realized it was a newborn baby. Investigators had originally learned that Alan had spent the night at Brock's home, so they interviewed her on December 17th, 9 days after the homicide. She told detectives she had never seen a pregnant woman at the house. She initially claimed the baby had been stillborn, but a few days later in a follow-up interview, Alan was shown the baby's autopsy report, proving that this was not true. At that point, Alan allegedly confessed to ending his life with a knife. She said she had intended to have Baby Doe at the hospital and put it up for adoption after his birth. Alan was booked into the Choctaw County Detention Center and is being held without bond. And Baby Doe can now be properly laid to rest and his killer will now be held accountable. It was a dark, snowy night on February 3, 1972 when the Durhams, a well-respected family in North Carolina, were brutally murdered in their own home. The case remained unsolved for over 5 decades, causing fear and unease in the community as people wondered who could have committed such a heinous crime. There are some mysteries in this world that seem to be shrouded in darkness, their secrets hidden away from prying eyes and curious minds. Finally, investigators were able to solve the triple homicide after more than 50 years in 2022. Could this case have been linked to organized crime? How were police able to solve this case? Today's case takes us to the beautiful city of Boone, North Carolina, which is a picturesque mountain town located in the northwest region of the state. Nestled in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, it is a popular destination for outdoor enthusiasts and nature lovers. Boone is home to the Appalachian State University, which brings a youthful energy to the town. Visitors can explore the charming downtown area, which is filled with unique shops, restaurants, and galleries. Outdoor activities abound in the area with opportunities for hiking, biking, skiing, and more. Boone's natural beauty, rich history, and vibrant culture make it a mesmerizing destination in North Carolina. Bartex Bryce Durham, the son of Coy M. Durham and Collie Devon Crabb Durham, was born on November 12, 1926 in the beautiful state of North Carolina. He was a man of many talents and experiences who lived a meaningful life. Bryce's siblings Ralph L. Durham and Gail Durham Manlin were an important part of his life while growing up. He graduated from Appalachian State University with a degree in history and physical education in 1941. And went on to teach for a year at Mount Pleasant School in Wilkes County after World War II. But his career path took a different turn, and for 6 years before settling in Boone, Durham operated the Mount Airy Auto Loan and Sales Finance Company. Before that, he was a part of the Home Finance Company for 13 years, gaining valuable expertise in finance and business. Despite his varied professional background, Bruce Durham remained a loyal member of the Boone community until his tragic and untimely death in 1972. Virginia, born on October 24, 1927, was the daughter of Calvin M. Church and Virginia Lucenia Eller Church. She was one of 5 siblings, and the other 4 were Winnie Levon Church Elliott, Dashia Church, Dovey Pierce Church Baker, and Rena Mosio Bumgardner Walsh, who were all integral parts of her life as she grew up. In 1951, Bryce and Virginia got married, and later that year Virginia gave birth to a baby girl, and they named their daughter Ginny Sue Durham. On May 2, 1953, they were blessed with a son and gave him the name Bobby Joe Durham. They were a loving and tight-knit family. Ginny Sue was later married to the love of her life, Troy Hall. Nestled in the mountainous terrain of Boone, North Carolina, the Durham family had found their heaven. After moving from Wilkes to Mount Airy, the family of three decided to start afresh and settled in Boone in 1969. Their residence, 187 Clyde Townsend Road, was perched atop a steep driveway just off the 105 bypass. Ginny Sue Hall lived a mere 4 miles away with her husband. It was the perfect place for the Durhams, a sanctuary from the hustle and bustle of life. On the winter evening of February 3, 1972, in the sleepy town of Boone, North Carolina, the weather was unrelenting. The frigid air whipped through the trees, sending snowflakes swirling in a chaotic dance. The Durham family hunkered down in their home on Clyde Townsend Road, seeking refuge from the biting cold. Bruce Durham, the owner of a Buick dealership, and his wife Virginia, who was a librarian, had relocated to Boone from Mount Airy just a year prior. Their son Bobby was a freshman at Appalachian State University. The family was known for their hard work, their reserved nature, and their preference for solitude. However, as the wind howled outside, something sinister was brewing inside. A tragedy was about to unfold that would shake Boone to its core. Unbeknownst to the Durham family, their lives were about to change forever. On a snowy night on February 3, 1972, Bryce and Virginia Durham were at home with their son Bobby when a horrific tragedy struck them. The Hall family sat cozily in their split-level home, at peace and content. But their peace was soon shattered by a phone call that sent shivers down their spines. Virginia Durham's panicked voice on the other end of the line conveyed the urgency of the situation, her voice trembling as she whispered to her son-in-law, Justin Troy Hall, about several intruders who had broken into her home. But before anyone could make sense of the call ended abruptly, leaving Hall wondering if it was just a cruel prank. Despite Hall's doubts about the validity of the call, his wife Ginny was overcome with worry for her family's safety. They hurriedly made their way to the car, which stubbornly refused to start. As the road up to the Durham's house was treacherous, they couldn't make it on foot. Luckily, a neighbor and private detective, Cecil Small, agreed to drive them up there. Ginny remained in the car as Hall and their neighbor Cecil went inside. What they found inside the house was a scene of chaos. The house had been ransacked and the sound of running water filled the air. But as they made their way to the ground floor bathroom, the true horror of the situation was revealed. There in the cramped space lay the lifeless and fully clothed bodies of Bryce, Bobby, and Virginia Durham in the bathtub, their heads submerged and the water still running. The phone line had been ripped from the wall, leaving the house eerily silent. With no other options left, Hall called the authorities at around 11 p.m. from the neighbor's apartment to investigate the gruesome scene before them. In a matter of minutes, a flurry of law enforcement officers arrived, their flashing lights piercing through the dark of this snowy night. As investigators stepped into the Durham home, their eyes scanned the once tidy interior that now looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Drawers were pulled out, clothing was strewn across the floor, and pictures hung at odd angles or lay shattered on the ground. Closets had been ransacked and the furniture was knocked over as if the perpetrators had been searching for something in a frenzied state. The officers' eyes then fell on the torn sofa set where the Durhams had been peacefully enjoying a late-night snack in their favorite TV show. The sight of the chaos and violence left a heavy feeling in the pit of their stomachs as they knew they were in for a long and grueling investigation. The television still flickered, with 3 half-filled glasses and plates of partially eaten food left abandoned on a coffee table. Further, they noticed something peculiar on the kitchen table, a half-eaten baked chicken, which indicated that the crime happened while the Durhams were enjoying their meal together. At first, it appeared to be a simple robbery gone wrong, but the presence of untouched valuables raised suspicions. A money bag bulging with cash sat undisturbed, a testament to the fact that robbery was not the motive behind the heinous crime. The agents from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation knew they had to act fast. They carefully transported the bodies to Chapel Hill for an autopsy. The results were grim, but not surprising. Dr. Paige Hudson, the state medical examiner, confirmed the cause of the Durham's family death. Virginia died of strangulation, while the two men had been strangled and drowned. As the investigation into the Durham family murders began, agents from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation descended upon the Durham residence, determined to uncover the truth behind the brutal murders. With precision and determination, they combed through every inch of the house, carefully cataloging every clue and piece of evidence they found. As the investigation deepened, the team grew, swelling to 7 or 8 agents by Saturday morning. But that was only the beginning. To unlock the secrets of the crime, they called upon the expertise of 2 top physicists from the State Crime Laboratory, who arrived in Boone late Saturday night to join the hunt for answers. For hours, they pored over the evidence, piecing together the clues and working tirelessly to unravel the mystery of the Durham murders. As the investigation proceeded, witnesses came forward with vital information. One eyewitness reported seeing a green and white SUV leaving the Durham's residence just after 10:30 p.m. that fateful night, but the vehicle disappeared in seconds. The North Carolina Highway Patrol launched a search for the SUV and found it abandoned on the side of the road a few miles away. The engine was still running, windshield wipers slapping against the snow, and doors firmly closed. The investigators realized that the killers had used the SUV as their escape car. It was later discovered that Bryce Durham had taken the SUV from his dealership to get home in treacherous weather conditions. As the police searched the car, they found a bag of silver presumably taken from the Durham residence. It was a pivotal clue, and investigators hoped it would lead them to the perpetrators of this heinous crime. The investigation into the Durham murders was a tough journey through the murky waters of suspicion and speculation. The list of possible suspects was long and winding, with multiple twists and turns along the way. Justin Troy Hall, the estranged son-in-law of Bryce and Virginia Durham, was among those scrutinized by authorities. A group of men from Asheville also came under the microscope, arrested and charged in connection with the killings, only to be set free due to a lack of evidence. Rumors and whispers of a contract killing hung heavy in the air, fueled by the precision of the knots used to bind the victims. But as the years rolled by, leads became cold. The Watauga County Sheriff's Department, Boone Police Department, and North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation all toiled tirelessly, yet the trail grew colder with each passing day. It seemed as though the answers to this brutal crime would forever remain a mystery. For over 45 years, the Durham triple murder case remained an unsolved mystery, with leads drying up and investigators struggling to piece together the clues. But in 2019, a glimmer of hope emerged after a conversation between a man named Shane Burt and a sheriff's deputy in Georgia. Shane Burt was the son of a suspected killer, Billy Sunday Burt, who died in prison in 2017 while serving a life sentence for 3 murders that he committed in the 1970s. Shane Burt was helping with research for an upcoming book by Phil Hudgens when he shared a shocking story his father had once told him during a prison visit. A story of murder and mayhem that took place in the snowy mountains of North Carolina. According to Burt, his father had admitted to killing 3 people during a heavy snowstorm and had narrowly avoided capture. The news sent shockwaves through the White County Sheriff's Office, which immediately reached out to their counterparts in the Watauga County Sheriff's Office to share the information. This conversation led to a renewed investigation into the Durham murders case and brought new hope for justice for the victims and their families. The wheels of justice never stopped turning, and in the case of the Durham murders, they turned slowly but towards the truth. With new leads to follow, investigators wasted no time in tracking down Billy Wayne Davis, a known associate of Billy Burt, who was already serving a life sentence in Georgia for his previous crimes. The Sheriff's Department conducted 3 separate sessions in September 2019, October 2020, and August 2021, spanning 2 years, each one with a crucial piece of the puzzle in determining who was responsible for the heinous crimes. It was the corroboration of evidence from these interviews, as well as from 2 other sources, that finally led to the revelation of the truth. Through meticulous evidence gathering and careful cross-referencing, the investigators were able to piece together a shocking connection to a case from across state lines. The Fleming case of 1973 involved a network known as the Dixie Mafia, a loosely organized network of criminals that had terrorized the Southeast with their violent crimes in the 60s and 70s. This case had similar circumstances to the Durham murders, and names began to surface that linked the two together. According to officials, Billy Wayne Davis, who is 81 years old and a resident of a correctional facility in Augusta, Georgia, is the only surviving member of the notorious Dixie Mafia. He is currently serving a life sentence for murder at the Augusta State Medical Prison in Georgia and has been in prison since 1986. According to investigators, he revealed details about a hired hit in the North Carolina mountains that went awry during a heavy snowstorm. Davis admitted to acting as the group's getaway driver during the Durham family murders, claiming that it was the other three men, Billy Sunday Burt, Bobby Jean Gaddis, and Charles David Reed, who entered the house that fateful night. Davis refused to reveal any other information about them. Despite the breakthrough in the Durham family murder case in 2022, justice may never be fully served. With 3 of the 4 suspects already deceased, charges are not expected to be filed for the killings. The 4th suspect, 81-year-old Billy Wayne Davis, is currently serving a life sentence in a Georgia prison, and he is not expected to see freedom anytime soon. The idea of justice being served may be nothing more than a mere fantasy for the victims' families, who have waited for 5 long decades for answers. The tragedy of this cold case is compounded by the fact that the identities of those who ordered the hit remain unknown. For the surviving family members, the lingering question of why their loved ones were targeted may haunt them forever. Special Agent in charge for the Northwestern District, North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation Chris Laws praised the diligent work of all the professionals and community members who have contributed their efforts to the case over the years. Ginny Durham, the sole surviving member of the Durham family, was full of gratitude as she expressed her appreciation in the press conference that was held in 2022 to the dedicated individuals who worked tirelessly to solve her family's 50-year-old cold case. She acknowledged the sacrifices made by these investigators, who spent countless days and weekends to solve the case. Ginny Durham was especially grateful to Len Hagman, the sheriff of Watauga County, who remained committed to bringing closure to her family. She also expressed her gratitude to Wade Colford, a special agent with the State Bureau of Investigation, Carolyn Johnson, captain of investigations for Watauga County Sheriff's Office, and Charles Whitman, a retired SBI special agent who continued to work on the case even after retirement. For Ginny Durham, their unwavering dedication and friendship meant the world to her, and it gave her hope in the midst of difficult years. It's a testament to the human spirit's power to persevere, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Watauga County Sheriff Len Hagman also extended his thanks to all the agencies, law enforcement officials, investigators, and agents who had worked on the case for decades. The resolution of the Durham case was a much-needed turning point for the community affected by the tragic events of 1972. The Watauga County Sheriff's Office acknowledged the numerous individuals who have played a role in bringing the case to a close, and expressed their appreciation for the efforts of everyone who helped find answers for the Durham family. For Rufus Edmonston, former North Carolina Attorney General, it became a personal preoccupation. He met with Bryce Durham's mother, who had begged him to find the killers, and it broke his heart to see her die without finding closure. "I didn't want to let her down," he said. "It was the mystery of the mountains for years and years, and Edmonston was frustrated he couldn't solve it himself. But now, thanks to the tireless work of Sheriff Hagamond and his team, the case has been solved." For Edmonston, it was a great relief, and he expressed his gratitude to the investigators who made it happen. The son of one of the perpetrators, Shane Burt, wants to apologize to every single victim of his father, Billy Sunday Burt. Despite his father being a murderous man who killed dozens of people, Shane is not trying to cover up his heinous acts. Instead, he wants to provide closure to as many people as he can. The case may have taken 50 years to be solved, but everyone involved showed dedication and commitment to justice, which is a testament to their perseverance. Despite the lack of closure, the fact that the case has been solved after 50 years brings some measure of relief, and the hope that future generations will be able to rest easy knowing that justice has prevailed, even if only partially. We hope that you've enjoyed this gripping story of how this cold case was solved after 50 years. The Durham family can finally find peace and closure after over 4 decades of waiting. Thanks to the hard work and dedication of law enforcement officials, investigators and community members, justice has been served. The persistence and commitment of those involved in this case remind us that it is never too late to seek the truth and find answers. Cindy Ann Blazek was born on February 3, 1962 to James and Jean in Rosetown, Saskatchewan. Youngest of 4 on a cattle and grain farm, book smart, steady, the kid who'd volunteer before you finished asking. In high school, she did it all. Honors, cheerleading, candy striping. Summers in university, she was a care aide at the seniors' home. Families told her parents their loved ones were calmer after Cindy's visits. She chose teaching for the same reason. She just wanted to help. By 1984, degree in hand, she took her first job in Pelican Narrows on Peter Ballantine Cree Nation. 2 years later, she moved to the resource room at Chief Taylor Elementary on Onion Lake Cree Nation near Lloydminster. Saturday night, December 6, 1986, around 2:15 a.m., her boyfriend, RCMP Constable David Gray Eyes, called from Pelican Narrows. Mostly yes, no stuff, then I love you. Later, her family learned the bedroom phone cord had been cut. Her brother, Jamie, thinks she wasn't annoyed. She just couldn't say more. Before daylight, violence moved through that house. Investigators believe there were at least 2 attackers. It started in the master bedroom, dragged down the hall, into the kitchen, into the living room. Broad smears on the walls, blood through the carpet and underlay into the linoleum. Cindy fought hard. Deep defensive cuts on every finger of her right hand, 2 on her left. The pathologist counted 13 stab wounds, 11 to the neck, an artery severed, no smoke in her lungs, no seminal evidence. Afterwards, someone set the house on fire. Around 3 p.m. Sunday, December 7th, firefighters and police found her inside. She was 24. Police charged 2 people, 22-year-old Braun Oliver Perry and a 17-year-old from Lloydminster. A jury first found Perry guilty, but that verdict got tossed because jurors saw material they shouldn't have. The case moved, new trial, June 1988, acquittal. The judge said the proof wasn't there and criticized a photo lineup. That same year, the youth was tried and acquitted too. Again, not enough to convict. 2 courts, 2 acquittals, no one held to account. What the scene still says is simple and awful. A long fight through the home, injuries that prove she fought. Medical findings that put death before the fire. The Blazeks didn't go quiet. Jamie drove back to Onion Lake again and again, talking to anyone who'd talk, passing tips to RCMP, just pushing. He and his sister Debbie say they still don't have the full picture of those hours. They want the truth in order. The questions don't change. Who came into that cul-de-sac? After she was killed, her mom created the Cindy Blazek Memorial Award for the most improved Grade 4 resource room student at Onion Lake and presented the first one with Jamie. One recipient, Priscilla Horse, was murdered in 1997. Another loss in the same community Cindy chose to serve. Right now, Saskatchewan RCMP still lists Cindy's homicide as active. They've said sharing more detail publicly won't help. John Eva Carice was born on February 18, 1958. By 43, she was an Indigenous mother of 3 from Kirkland Lake, Ontario. Warm, energetic, and a little stubborn in the best way. A blood clot on Christmas Eve 1991 stopped her heart. She survived, but the brain injury that followed wrecked her short-term memory. Families say she became childlike at times, repeating herself, losing track, needing someone close by. She still talked about becoming a welder. Mostly she just wanted to be with her kids. After she got sick, her husband tried to care for her. It was a lot. 2 young children, 4 and 2, and a partner who suddenly needed round-the-clock help. With guidance from their family doctor, the decision was made to place her at North Bay Psychiatric Hospital about 3 hours away, so she'd be safe and watched. Dawn moved in during the early 90s and stayed until 2001. Staff remembered her as witty and friendly and always planning to get back to her children. She even gave herself a nickname, the Running Bear. The hospital kept her own close observation, but she still slipped away. Between 1997 and 2001, she left 9 times. And every time they found her on the grounds or along Highway 11, sometimes facing the wrong direction, sometimes the right one, it was always about home. Thursday, August 9th, 2001. Earlier that day, she'd been in the craft room. An exit door sat about 29 feet away. She was left alone, long enough to go. What rattled the family later was this. Her duffel bag and her native status card were also missing, even though personal items were supposed to be locked in a secure vault. Family and advocates have raised a serious concern. A staff member, later convicted in an unrelated homicide case, had access to the secure vault where Dawn's status card was kept. Dawn wouldn't have had access to that room, yet her card vanished the same day she did. Staff didn't call police until the next day. About 16 hours later, Dawn and those belongings were never found. Her case sits inside a larger troubling pattern. She was one of 6 patients who vanished from that hospital between 1966 and 2010. Former staff have described a place stretched thin, too many patients, not enough staff, and record-keeping that left gaps you could fall through. The hospital opened in 1952, closed in 2011, and the buildings were demolished in 2013. Answers didn't come down with the walls. People did try. North Bay Police interviewed staff, family, and friends. Alerts went out to other agencies and to the public. A couple of tips surfaced early, but nothing stuck. Police haven't declared foul play in Dawn's case, and they haven't ruled it out either. Maybe she got lost in the woods by the property. Maybe she caught a ride and something went wrong. Maybe she checked in somewhere under her own name and privacy rules kept anyone from connecting the dots. Her daughter Sandra kept digging. Through her own research, she learned a man, someone she considers a person of interest, visited her mom around 11 a.m. that morning. At the time, she was told he was still an inpatient. Later, she learned he was actually living in the community and could come and go. Among Dawn's things, Sandra says she found a photo album inscribed to her mother with his name and the nickname, the Prince. Felt personal. She's never shaken the belief that he might know something. Years later, staff who spoke with a private investigator shared a last sighting around 11:30 a.m., not 5 p.m., as listed in the original police report. A shift like that changes where you look and how soon you get there. Sandra has asked the lead detective to interview this person of interest. She says it still hasn't happened. There's been outside help too. Ellen White, a former private investigator, volunteers on cold cases and shares what she learns on her podcast, Whereabouts Unknown. Listeners have provided tips, and through those responses, she learned more about the missing duffel and the status card, both reportedly gone from the vault when Dawn left that last time. Meanwhile, the tools to search have improved. In 2018, a new DNA data bank in Canada began comparing missing person profiles with unidentified human remains. A match can happen in the background after submissions are made. Even amateur sleuths look through public profiles to suggest connections. In the first 3 years, 38 matches were made, giving families answers they'd waited on for years. Tips still trickle in. Potential sightings of Dawn have been reported across the country, far more than anything that surfaced in those first months. One video from Brussels, Ontario looked promising, ruled out after local police confirmed the woman was known to them and not Dawn. Another sighting in a Timmins coffee shop turned out to be a professional who proved her identity. False leads frustrate everyone, but they keep the conversation going. Some details never fade. Dawn was last seen in a long pink, short-sleeve dress with a white floral print, a button front, and a crisscross drawstring at the back. She wore reddish-brown closed-toe sandals and may have been carrying a duffel. When she ran before, she tended to head for Highway 11 toward Kirkland Lake. She also knew her children's guardians were planning a move to Sudbury, so that direction may have made sense, too. Either way, both roads felt like a path back to her kids. Dawn was a loving, vibrant, proud Indigenous woman from the Odanak First Nation. Her case is open, and her family believes it hasn't been treated with the seriousness it deserves. Dean Kelly Morrison was born on May 27, 1969. At 44, he was in Kamloops, British Columbia, a father of 3, Annie, Edie, and Paz. That fall, most jobs ran along Highway 5 around Stump Lake, between Kamloops and Merritt. He and his wife had recently separated. Family says he was trying to steady himself, but he felt low. October 22, 2013, Dean's at Stump Lake Ranch. His van won't start. Around 9 a.m., the manager spots him, rough around the edges, wanting to head out. Accounts say he was let go that morning after appearing lethargic and unkempt. A tow is called. He's asked to tidy his work area while they wait. By midday, the tow truck rolls in. No Dean. The manager checks the outbuildings, the yard. Nothing. A little after 1 p.m., the truck leaves. Dean doesn't. He's just gone. About a week passes before the missing person report is filed. Ranch staff scour the property for weeks. In October 2019, search and rescue comes back. Fresh teams, new grids, pushing into gullies and thin timber around Stump Lake. Nothing. Dean called his mother Elizabeth every week. On days off, he stayed with his sister, who was managing anxiety and depression. Elizabeth says the sister gave him Ativan. The manager later told a reporter Dean seemed impaired that morning. His road to Stump Lake wasn't straight. He and his wife once ran a cafe in Merritt. In Langley, he'd twice put his name forward as an NDP candidate. During the 2013 campaign, he worked for MLA Harry Lawley. Then slid into community reporting at the Merritt News and later the Merritt Herald briefly as editor. Dean's wallet and personal effects were found in his trailer. No money moved in his bank account after he vanished. Decades earlier, Dean's grandfather vanished, was declared dead, and surfaced 30 years later living on the streets. An uncle disappeared in the 1970s and was found murdered soon after. In the years after Dean vanished, attention stretched across the interior to other disappearances. Luke Neville, 48, was last seen October 9, 2017, around Spence's Bridge, where he lived and worked as a renovation contractor. The next day, his white Ford E250 was found burned on a Forest Service road about 12 miles out. RCMP deemed the case suspicious. A year in, investigators renewed appeals, hoping time might loosen lips. Luke had roots in eastern Canada, years in firefighting with his brothers, and a settled life in Spence's Bridge. 15 months after he was reported missing, his brother Mark flew in from Ottawa to post billboards and stand with RCMP. Police told the family they suspected foul play. A little more than an hour southeast lies the Nicola Valley, where a massive search launched in winter 2019 for 32-year-old Ben Tyner, the new manager at Nicola Ranch. Last seen the afternoon of January 26th. His horse turned up 2 days later on a logging road, fully tacked, rain broken. With temperatures plunging and no sign of his route, the search stood down after 7 days. That spring, RCMP said there was reason to believe criminality was involved. May have been the victim of homicide. Years later, he still hasn't been found. Early questions asked whether these disappearances were connected. RCMP said they looked for links and found none. As of September 2025, none of the three men, Dean Morrison, Luke Neville, or Ben Tyner, has been located. There was a surge of hope near Kamloops in April 2025, when skeletal remains were found on rural land near Greenstone Road in the Pendleton Creek area. In June, RCMP identified them as Jordan Dean Nandi, 27, missing since March 2023. Investigators believe foul play led to his death. He'd been under a court-ordered curfew in Fort St. John, had an active warrant, and had reportedly traveled south with local associates weeks before his family reported him missing. Many locals talk about a darker pattern in that stretch of the interior. More men gone, more questions than answers. Marshall Iwasa, 27, missing since November 2019, his burned-out truck found on a logging road near Darcy. Ryan Preventure, 38, and Richard Skur, 37, last seen July 17, 2019, found dead a month later, with RCMP saying criminality was involved. Ryan Stuka, 20, last seen February 17, 2018, at a Kamloops area ski resort. James Gregory Lee was born on July 29, 1992. Everyone called him Jamie. He grew up a good-looking kid, full of energy and easy smiles. At 19, he was living just 4 blocks from his parents in Grand Prairie, Alberta. Most nights, he still came home for supper, a little TV, and the comfort of routine. He wasn't in trouble, wasn't hanging around a bad crowd. He was in welding school, planning to make a career of it. Most mornings his mom drove him to work and picked him up after, even though he could have walked. That was just their rhythm. In 2011, his father's health was failing because of a rare kidney disease. On September 3rd, Jamie finally got good news. His mom had been approved to donate a kidney, a life-saving match. His parents told him as they drove home from the ICU in Edmonton. Later that day, Jamie called after work, excited. He was heading out for a last-minute camping trip with friends, lifted by the good news. The group went to McLeod Flats Campground, also called Smoky Flats. It was familiar ground, a mile-long dirt road leading to a river spot where local kids often camped. That dry year, the river was so low you could drive straight onto what was usually an island. That weekend, hundreds of young people filled the area. By night, the party was in full swing. Jamie had a lot to drink. Friends later said he didn't seem himself. Still down about his dad, even though the transplant news should have been a lift. Near dawn, Jamie said he wanted to go home. He climbed into his Jeep with the keys. His friends, not wanting him to drink and drive, pulled him out. In the scuffle, he hit his head hard on the steel frame of the driver's door. He yelped, insisted he was fine, then angry and amped, walked off into the bush sometime between 4:30 and 5 a.m. He was never seen again. At 5:30, his friends grew worried and started looking. By chance at 6 a.m., a specialized search and rescue team arrived at Smoky Flats for training, a complete fluke, and immediately joined in. For more than a month, volunteers and officials calmed the area. Grid teams on foot, horses, aircraft, even canoes along the river. The river was checked by boat, but with levels so low that year, drowning seemed unlikely. Searchers found some of Jamie's belongings, his cigarettes, a piece of his medical ID card, and a first aid certificate with his name. About a mile from the campsite, those items were lying on a dirt road. His mom later explained he might have gotten frustrated when he realized his lighter was still in the Jeep, and he might have thrown the cigarettes down. The terrain was difficult, old logged ground, thick with deadfall. Some parts of the search were frustrating. Witnesses said RCMP tried to canine once, then put the dog away because of too many people. The family brought in private canine teams. One dog followed Jamie's scent through the campground, across the river, into the bush, and then strangely up a tree. The handler said the dog stopped and looked up, something rarely seen. On the far side of the tree, the scent picked up again and led to a gravel pit 3 miles away. There, on a small mound, searchers found a single, clear shoe impression. Just days before, Jamie had bought new Adidas sneakers. They were a size 13 with a distinctive outsole. The store confirmed only 2 pairs in that size had been sold in town. The print was very likely his. A second dog began at the gravel pit, tracked the scent further, and stopped at a busy road, suggesting he may have been picked up by a vehicle. Weeks later, tips surfaced. A red logging truck had pulled up to the volunteer search table along Highway 40. The driver, described as about 30 with shoulder-length blonde hair, said he'd picked up a young man the morning after Jamie disappeared. He noted the boy had blood on him and dropped him off in Grand Cache, 2.5 hours away. Jamie's mom tried to chase it down. She says RCMP weren't interested. She tracked the truck, photographed it, and learned it had changed hands just weeks after Jamie vanished. The opportunity to question that driver was lost. At home, the change was immediate. Jamie had been the son who always stopped in for supper, who was always around. Suddenly, the chair he favored sat empty. The town rallied. 200 searchers a day, even staff from the local museum where his mother worked. But as weeks stretched into months, no answers came. RCMP eventually polygraphed all of Jamie's friends from that night. According to them, every one of the boys passed cleanly and their accounts stayed consistent. Jamie's case went quiet for years, officially inactive after 2016. Recently, it was transferred to the County of Grand Prairie RCMP, where a new investigator has started fresh. Molly Anita Margaret Justice was born circa 1927. By 15, she lived on Brett Avenue in Saanich, British Columbia, just east of Swan Lake, where the Canadian National Railway grade cut a quick line home. It was wartime, cold air, and a hint of snow. January 18, 1943, Molly steps off the 5:50 p.m. bus after her shift at General Warehouse Ltd., a garment factory where a teenager's already trusted as head seamstress. The driver watches her stride into the dark. She doesn't like that walk along the tracks, but the shortcut is the shortcut and it points straight home. She never makes it. A couple leaving Swan Lake spots blood-stained packages. Officers follow the trail to the rail bed, what's now the Galloping Goose, and find her face down in the snow. Her body's still warm. 2 heavy blows to the head, nearly 24 stab wounds from a small blade. Her purse and a ring are gone. There's no sexual assault. Saanich police bring in Victoria and provincial officers, plus the Army's Provost Corps. They retrace her route off at Carey Road, along University to Douglas, over to Vernon, down the embankment by the bridge, then onto the CNR grade. She's killed at the next crossing, where the tracks meet Darwin Road. Detectives even try hot water to free clues, then stop before they wash them away. A municipal reward brings silence. 2 weeks later, Swan Lake gives up new leads. Under an upside-down bucket, Molly's purse and a lighter engraved RL. No usable prints. Nearby, men's tan capeskin gloves, soft full lining, snug elastic wrist ring by 2. Then, on May 16, 1943, an 11-year-old girl was sexually assaulted by 15-year-old Francis James Halbert, who went by Frank and sometimes used the last name Pepler. During the assault, he threatened the girl, saying he was going to do to her what he did to Molly. He was arrested the same day and convicted for the assault 2 weeks later. He was questioned about Molly, but denied being responsible for her murder and instead pointed investigators to his co-worker, 49-year-old William Mitchell, saying Mitchell had confessed. Mitchell was arrested and tried for the murder. However, due to the lack of evidence and a workplace alibi placing him at work on the night of the murder, he was acquitted. 24 years later, in 1967, Holbert's name resurfaced, not for a murder charge, but for perjury related to what he'd said as a youth during the Mitchell proceedings. Over the years, Holbert reportedly admitted on multiple occasions to murdering Molly, but he was never charged with the homicide. Instead, he received 4.5 years in prison for perjury. Over the years, rumors swirled that he avoided a murder charge because he was related to then-Deputy Attorney General Eric Pepler, but a 1996 review found no evidence to support that claim. The review did not declare a perpetrator, though police have long indicated they believe Holbert was likely the killer. Unfortunately, evidence recovered at the time, such as hair reportedly found under Molly's fingernails and a fingerprint on items from her purse, was not retained. Investigators did find an unlabeled brown-handled knife in the evidence decades later and had it tested, but no blood was found on the blade. It remains unclear whether this was the actual murder weapon. It's now been over 82 years since Molly was murdered, and as of September 2025, the case remains unsolved. 24-year-old Rita Corin was brutally murdered in her own apartment in Burlington, Vermont on July 19, 1971. The killer left no clues, no fingerprints, and vanished into thin air. At the time, with forensic and DNA science being not as advanced as it is today, there was not much the police could do. For 50 to 52 years, the case lay cold and left investigators scratching their heads as they tried to comprehend what had happened. Who killed Rita Corin? How did the police solve the case? Today's story takes us to Burlington, a city in the state of Vermont in the United States. It possesses a captivating mix of history, culture, and natural beauty. It's located on the eastern shore of Lake Champlain. The city boasts stunning views of the lake and surrounding mountains. Burlington's fascinating history dates back to its founding in 1785, and its vibrant economy is driven by technology, education, healthcare, and tourism. But this mesmerizing city bore witness to a terrible crime that took place on July 20, 1971, and remained unsolved for the next 52 years. On June 21, 1947, Mary Eleanor Donahue Corrin and Thomas F. Corrin of New York City held their precious daughter for the first time and named her Rita Corrin. Rita was the first child that the Corrin family had welcomed. As time passed, they had 2 more children, and Rita got to welcome her 2 younger siblings. She was blessed with a loving and caring younger brother, Thomas Corrin Jr., as well as a beautiful and kind younger sister, Mary Corrin. The Corrin family was well known and well liked in the area they resided, especially since her father Thomas was the zoning administrator for the community. Growing up, Rita was always a quiet and sweet presence, with a shy demeanor that belied her deep reserves of kindness and intelligence. She excelled academically and completed her graduation from Trinity College. She was always passionate about teaching. She completed her degree in primary education and took graduate courses at the University of Vermont. Rita lived with her family for 24 years until one day she decided to move out. It was the first time she had lived away from them, and she moved into an apartment on 17 Brooks Avenue in Burlington, Vermont, with 3 other roommates. She fulfilled her dream when she became a beloved second-grade teacher in Milton Elementary School. All her students loved her, and she made a lasting impact on their lives. One of her students, Jim Rabar, still remembers her 5 decades later for an act of kindness she showed him when he was in the 2nd grade. While acting in a school play, he used a teddy bear as a prop, which he liked a lot, and after the play he asked Rita if he could keep it, and Rita allowed him to do so. Rita was also a talented singer and dancer, as she would often spend her time with her younger sister Mary, tap dancing and singing together. During the summer, Rita worked part-time as a chambermaid at the South Burlington Colonial Motor Inn, where she was known for her hard-working and diligent nature. She was loved by her coworkers and guests alike, who were touched by her warmth and sincerity. Can you imagine any reason for such a quiet, kind, and warm-hearted person to be killed so brutally? What could have been the reason behind her murder? On July 20th, 1971, when Beverly, one of the roommates of Rita, came back home, she had no idea that a horrifying scene was waiting for her. Beverly Lamphere returned back late from a date with her boyfriend at 1 a.m. The 2 other roommates were not staying at the house that night, so it was just her and Rita. As she opened the door, she was immediately hit with the scent of iron, the unmistakable smell of blood. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she saw a figure lying on the ground. As she got closer, she realized it was Rita, lying partially nude with blood all over her body. Her hair was still in curlers, and it looked like she had been preparing for bed when the attack happened. Beverly screamed out for her boyfriend, hoping he could somehow save her friend, but it was already too late. Rita was gone, her life snuffed out in a brutal and senseless act of violence. Beverly's mind raced with questions. Who could do such a thing? Why would someone hurt her dear friend? She immediately called the police, as she was very scared and disheartened seeing her friend's demise. The darkness of the night was not comforting, and her mind was racing with thoughts about Rita. She had left her dear friend and roommate just a few hours ago, and Rita had been happy and excited to have the apartment all to herself. The silence of the night was deafening as Beverly and her boyfriend waited for the police to arrive. They couldn't understand why no one had heard anything. No screams, no sound of a struggle. It was like the killer had disappeared into thin air. After a short while, the police arrived at the scene and began the investigation. At first, investigators thought that Rita may have been murdered for money, but Rita's purse containing about $20 was found untouched, so it became clear that a robbery was not the motive. When investigators started to examine the whole apartment, they saw there were blood stains in the kitchen, which indicated that the murderer could possibly have fled from there. After a thorough examination of the crime scene, the body was sent for an autopsy. The brutality of the attack was evident from the moment the chief medical examiner, Lawrence Harris, laid eyes on Rita's lifeless body. Her body was examined carefully, and they found violent bruises that covered her face and head. It was clear that she had fought for her life with everything she had, leaving behind signs of a fierce struggle. But in the end, it was the crushing grip of the killer's hands around her neck that had silenced her forever. As if the physical violence wasn't enough, the killer tried to kill her in the most brutal way possible. Her torn clothes were found discarded under her body, a cruel reminder of the heinous act that had taken place. The details of the assault were too gruesome to imagine, and it was a small comfort that she had not been sexually assaulted. Investigators swarmed the area around 17 Brooks Avenue, searching for any clues that could help solve the brutal murder of beloved teacher and chambermaid Rita Curran. The air was heavy with the weight of the unsolved crime, and residents of the town were on edge, fearful that the killer might still be lurking among them. Investigators went door to door. They also talked and interrogated the people around 17 Brooks Avenue to see if anyone might have seen or heard something out of the ordinary in the hours leading up to the discovery of Rita's body. They urged residents to think back to that fateful night and to come forward with any information that could help bring justice to the Curran family. The investigators combed through hundreds of leads, pursued every potential angle, and examined every piece of evidence they could find. Despite their best efforts, they hit a dead end. They found a single cigarette butt near Rita's lifeless arm, and they hoped it might provide some kind of a clue to her killer's identity. But at the time, DNA technology was not advanced enough to extract a profile, and the cigarette butt yielded no useful information. The killer remained a mystery, hidden in the shadows, leaving the investigators and the community puzzled. One day, in 1979, FBI agent John Bassett made a chilling connection. The motel where Curran worked was right next to the infamous Elizabeth Lund home for unwed mothers, the birthplace of none other than notorious serial killer Ted Bundy. As Bassett delved deeper into the case, he noticed uncanny similarities between the crime scene and those of Bundy's known victims. Bundy's modus operandi involved stalking the victims for days or weeks before assaulting them. He broke into his victims' apartments and cased their homes, learning their routines and which doors were unlocked. Rita's sister believed Ted Bundy was responsible for her sister's murder and cited some similarities to his other victims. She emphasized that all of Bundy's victims had long brown hair parted in the middle, which she believed was his motive for revenge against his ex-girlfriend. However, Bundy later stated that his victims were chosen for their youth and attractiveness, and not for specific hair color or style. But after looking into the possible similarities, police found that there were details in this case that did not match Bundy's profile. Burlington Police Chief Kevin Scully stated that Bundy would attack his victims when they were asleep, strangle them with a ligature, and use a weapon to bludgeon them. However, Rita was awake and fought back and was strangled manually with fists. Bundy's crimes were usually planned and involved the use of a weapon in ligature, but Rita's murder seemed impulsive and only involved the use of hands and fists. Before Bundy's execution on January 24, 1989, he denied committing any murders in Vermont, and the Burlington police stated that they had investigated the possibility of his involvement in the Rita Curran case and concluded that Bundy was elsewhere in the country at the time. Now they were left with no other clues that could lead them to the real killer of Rita, and again the case slowly went cold. For decades, the case of Rita Curran's brutal murder remained a mystery to investigators. But in 2014, a tiny, seemingly insignificant piece of evidence became the key that would unlock the case. It was the cigarette butt, carelessly discarded near the victim's body, that had lain forgotten for years. Detectives knew that it was a long shot, but they were able to extract a DNA profile from the cigarette butt and submit it to the National Criminal Database. But unfortunately, no matches were found. It was a puzzling and frustrating dead end. But Detective Lieutenant James Trebb refused to give up. He knew that this DNA profile could be the key to unlocking the case, but he needed to think outside the box. He realized that the person who left that cigarette butt may have never had genetic material entered into the database, possibly because they had never been convicted of a felony. Detective Lieutenant James Trebb refused to let the case of Rita Curran's murder go unsolved. In 2019, he made a bold move and gathered a team of experts to review the evidence, taking a fresh approach to the decades-old case. They combed through every piece of evidence with a fine-tooth comb, determined to find the missing puzzle piece that would crack the case wide open. Trebb knew that they needed a new strategy, and they found it in genetic genealogy. They decided to use this cutting-edge technique to analyze the DNA profile found on the cigarette but discovered at the scene of the crime. They delved deep into DNA databases, hoping to find a match for the genetic material that had eluded them for so long. Their hard work paid off when an outside expert in genetic genealogy was able to connect the DNA to relatives of a man named William DeRuis. The relative they then contacted was the half-brother of DeRuis, who was willing to give them his DNA sample, and his DNA helped to finally conclude with certainty that DeRuis was the one who left behind the cigarette but found at the scene of the crime. When police looked into DeRuis' whereabouts at the time of the murder, they found he was living 2 floors above Rita's apartment at 17 Brooks Avenue. With this breakthrough, they finally had the key to unlock the mystery of Rita Corin's murder. The investigation proceeded, and investigators now found additional DNA evidence on Corin's ripped housecoat that matched the DNA on the cigarette but found near her body. This discovery strengthened the case against Darius as it linked him to the crime scene in a more concrete manner. They then looked into his past and found out that William DeRuis was married to Michelle in the summer of 1971 in Burlington, just about 2 weeks before the murder. They were newlyweds who were living in the same building just 2 floors above Rita Corin when she was brutally murdered in 1971. Furthermore, investigators were able to re-interview DeRuis' then-wife, who had previously lied about his alibi when they had interviewed her during the initial investigation, and she admitted to her falsehood. She told them that she had been threatened by DeRuis to say that they were together on the night of the murder, but the truth was that they had had an argument, and DeRuis went outside for a walk to try and cool down. She had no idea about what happened when DeRuis was gone. Her admission was a key factor in the investigation as it helped to establish DeRuis' guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. She also told them that shortly after the crime DeRuis had left her and moved to Thailand to become a monk. 3 years later, he resurfaced in San Francisco where he met his second wife, Sarah Hepting. Detectives contacted Sarah, his second wife as well, and asked her about DeRuis. Sarah's account of DeRuis was chilling. She told Burlington police that he once stabbed a woman right in front of her, but luckily she survived the attack. In addition, she revealed that he had tried to strangle her in the same manner that Corin was killed. All of this, along with evidence found against him and the confession of his first wife, was enough for the police to be sure that they had their culprit. But sadly, despite the victory in solving the case, the day was bittersweet for the police, as when they looked into DeRuis, they learned that he had already died of a drug overdose in 1986. The news of the breakthrough in Rita Corin's murder case sent shockwaves through the community, bringing a mix of emotions for those who knew her and those who had only heard of her through stories. For Mary Campbell, Corin's sister, the case had haunted her family for generations. "We now have 2 generations in our family who never knew her," she said with a heavy heart. But through the tears and the pain, there was a glimmer of hope. Thomas Corin, Rita's brother, found solace in the support of his loved ones. "I pray to my parents and I pray to Rita. My wife Nancy tells me we will get through this. We are Corin strong," he said, and his voice was filled with determination. As news of the arrest spread, messages of praise and gratitude poured in from all corners. Former Burlington Police Chief Brandon Del Pozo, who had worked on the case, expressed his admiration for the hardworking detectives who never gave up. "This is one of those cases where I regretted that I couldn't find the killer. But I'm so proud of the Burlington Police Department," he said, and his voice was filled with pride. Jim Rabar, the former student of Karan's, spoke as well, saying, "She was beautiful from the inside out. She told me that I could keep the teddy bear, and I still have the teddy bear. I just can't find it," he said with a heavy heart. Rabar's sentiment was echoed by many in the community who remembered Karan as a dedicated teacher who had a passion for education and helping others learn. Her legacy will continue to live on in the hearts and minds of those who knew her, and those who only know her through the stories that have been passed down through generations. We hope you've enjoyed this gripping story of how this cold case was solved after more than 50 years. The tireless efforts of investigators and the advancements in forensic technology have allowed this case to finally be solved, bringing closure to the loved ones of the victim. Kim Everett Kirk was born January 12, 1970, and was one of 3 daughters. She met David Neal Cox through a friend at work around the year 2000, and initially he was a nice guy. They quickly married, and he became a stepfather to Kim's 2 daughters, and the couple went on to have 2 sons together. Cox was a truck driver, but following a back injury and a prescription for painkillers, he left the workforce and qualified for disability. He then became addicted to meth and started abusing Kim. Due to the drugs, his behavior and personality had suddenly changed. At some point, Cox had even gone as far as manufacturing his own meth. In 2009, when her daughter Lindsay confessed to her mother that Cox had been sexually assaulting her for a few years, Kim finally decided to divorce him. But this instilled fear into Kim, and she made plans for her and the kids to take refuge at a women's shelter out of fear that Cox would retaliate. Kim took the children and left and pressed charges against Cox, and when deputies arrived to the home, Cox was arrested for statutory rape, sexual battery, and child abuse. They also found the precursors to make meth. Kim, still deathly afraid of her estranged husband, moved her and the children in with her sister, Christy Simon. While in the county jail, he told other prisoners that if he ever got out, he would kill his wife. However, unable to raise bond money, he remained in jail for 9 months. During that time, he often made threatening phone calls and would tell her he was coming for her. Suddenly, in April 2010, his bond was significantly reduced, allowing him to raise enough funds to get out. The family only learned he had been released when a friend saw him on the street and called Kim. She then went to the Chancery Court and got protective orders against him in Lee, Pontotoc, and Union counties. Now that he was out, he would sometimes drive by her home and point his finger at her and simulate a gun. Then about 7 p.m. on May 14, 2010, tragedy would strike. 12-year-old Lindsay was sitting on the couch while her mom's sister, Christy, was cooking dinner, and one of her brothers was playing basketball outside. Her mother, Kim, was in the back of the house preparing a bath for her youngest son. That's when Cox shot through the screen door of the home in Sherman, Mississippi, before barging inside and ordering Lindsay not to move. He then chased her aunt out of the house. He then found Kim and shot her twice. Her youngest son would frantically run to a closet. Meanwhile, Aunt Christy called Kim's parents and told them what was happening. Cox called her parents and told them it was all their fault he was arrested and he had planned to kill all of them. Kim's father and stepmother, Benny and Melody Kirk, then had to serve as negotiators on the phone with Cox. They could hear Cox taunting Kim as she was dying and belittling her, and said he wanted to sit there and watch her suffer. Kim was able to talk on the phone briefly to her father while she lay on the floor bleeding to death and said, "Daddy, I'm dying." She was still hanging on to life at midnight. He had barricaded the 4 of them inside the home and physically and mentally tortured the family, and told law enforcement he planned to kill the children and then himself. When he stopped talking to law enforcement at 3:23 a.m., officers stormed the house and arrested him. Kim was sadly already deceased during those nearly 9 hours of holding the children hostage. Cox sexually assaulted his stepdaughter, Lindsay, 3 times in front of her dying mother, even as police surrounded the home. 2 years later, he pleaded guilty to capital murder, kidnapping, and several other felonies related to the standoff and was sentenced to death. He then began years of appealing his conviction and sentence. He then made plans to waive his appeals and proceed with the execution, which infuriated Lindsay as she wanted him to sit in prison and reflect on what he did to her and her family. Lindsay has allowed her name to be made public to tell her story. On November 17, 2021, 50-year-old Cox died by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, and Lindsay, now 23, was there to witness it. He became the first Mississippi inmate to be put to death in 9 years. In the days prior to his scheduled execution, Cox made a shocking confession. He said that he had been the one that killed his sister-in-law, Felicia Cox, who was married to his brother. On November 19th, 2 days after his execution, his attorneys hand-delivered a letter in which Cox confessed to the murder and gave details of where her body is located. Felicia had been missing since July 2, 2007, after making a visit to Kim and David Cox's home. Her remains were found where he said they'd be in Pontotoc County on his family's former property. He had been a person of interest in Felicia's disappearance, but authorities had no evidence at the time. Kim's father and stepmother raised Lindsay and her 2 younger brothers after Kim's death, and one of his sons still has fear that he will come after them, even knowing that he is no longer breathing the air that he didn't deserve. Tim Smith was the kind of fella folks counted on. Masters in social work, ran an assisted living community in Ocala, always showed up for his people. 8 years married to Herbert Swilly, who went by Herb, living in the Citrus Park neighborhood with Herb's daughter, Jordan. Weekends, you might catch Tim and Herb easing down the road on a three-wheeler, wind in their faces and not a care in the world. But come Saturday, March 25, 2023, about 10:45, deputies rolled out for a welfare check. Tim had missed work, which just wasn't like him. They used a landlord's key, stepped inside a little apartment tied to Tim, and the room told a story no one wanted to hear. Injuries to his face and neck, a tight mark at the throat, and that sharp, bleachy smell hanging in the air. Trouble had come calling. Thursday, the 23rd, Tim left work around 4. After that, it's all timestamps and tail lights. Prosecutors said the violence didn't begin in that apartment at all. It started back at the house Tim shared with Herb. Said Tim had an extreme dose of diphenhydramine, Benadryl's sleepy cousin, more than 30 times the usual dental ligature around his neck. Later, they said his body was moved to that small meetup apartment and staged like a fling gone wrong. Now the defense tried to plant doubt. That apartment saw traffic, dating apps, visitors, mixed DNA. Maybe detectives got tunnel vision, but there was a thread to pull. In the deep hours of March 24th, a white pickup, Herb's, caught on camera headed toward the apartment, then back home. Tim's Jeep shows up there and stays. A figure walks away into the dark. Next morning, deputies enter, find Tim on the floor. Body cam captures the moment they tell Herb his husband is dead. He doesn't ask how, just starts in on where he'd been. Earlier that same day, Herb had called the sheriff, couldn't reach Tim, said 2 nights before they watched TV, went to bed. He left early for the gym, came home to an empty house, figured Tim went on to work. Investigators later said parts of that tale were false or self-serving. And when they pressed, Herb's lawyer wanted immunity before he'd say another word. Then came more. The couple's Ring camera system accessed the key footage, deleted according to the state. Jordan testified she heard noises that night and helped throw things away at her father's direction. Something she regrets, and that he told her to say he'd been home all night. Neighbors near the house remembered late night shouting around March 23rd, 24th, and cars coming and going. Traffic that stopped cold after the homicide. Friends from AA and Tim's work circle said Herb was bullying about money and about Tim looking at a job out of country with a Zoom interview set for 9 a.m. on the 24th. He never made it. A recruiter said Tim was enthusiastic. Brookdale co-workers described the scramble when he didn't show. The landlord said Tim alone held that lease. On the 25th, Herb asked for entry, said he lost his key. A shop owner and a close friend recalled Herb moving quick, donating Tim's things, cleaning the Jeep so police wouldn't have ammunition, talking insurance and paperwork sooner than felt right. A DNA analyst with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement explained most items showed Tim's DNA. A few mixed profiles fit with the apartment's known use. The defense leaned on that. The state answered with the digital map, Tim's phone and Herb's truck, leaving home together just before 2 a.m. No credible sign Tim arranged any late-night meet with someone else. And then the why, part heartbreak, part arithmetic. Tim was the primary earner, eyeing that new job and maybe a new start. If he left, the money went with him. If he died, prosecutors said, Herb stood to benefit retirement funds and a life insurance policy around $333,000. After a week of testimony, jurors had the full picture. The drug levels, the ligature, the bleach, the truck and the Jeep, deleted video, tossed drugs, the finances, the plan to move. On Friday, September 19, 2025, they returned a verdict. Herbert Swilly, guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. Judge Robert Hodges handed down life with 687 days time served, and somewhere in Alcala, the elders Tim championed were tended by someone else that weekend. Friends stepped out of a courthouse into the Florida sun, searching for words that fit a man who didn't miss work, didn't miss promises, and this time couldn't come. Not the ending he earned, but at least finally an answer.